Hello from the Shenandoah Public Library. I'm Joy Stortvedt. I'm the Teen and Technology Librarian, and this is the first class that we've ever offered online. So bear with us if there are a few interesting things that happen. Dance.
Good morning.
She is going to be our teacher. I am excited to get to see what we're doing today. We are going to be making a monster bag.
Thank you, Joy. You know, I like to do a lot of quilting, so this is a different kind of sewing than what I normally do, even though I have done this in the past. So this was good for me to try this, and this was fun. This is the bag. It's a cross-body bag, and it has the little monster on the front, has the flap, comes down, lined, and has room on the inside for whatever you would care to put in there.
And we got the pattern for this from this book. It's called So Kawaii by Coley Knight, and we do want to thank her for giving us permission to use her pattern in this class. This book is available at the library. You can also pick up a pattern that I've enlarged from the library to make your own. So with that said, let's begin. So the reason we decided on a monster bag for one of our summer reading program is that the theme is Imagine Your Story. And so it works kind of a couple of ways. One way is that you get to imagine what kind of monster or creature your bag is. You get to imagine what it will look like when you're finished making it as we begin. And the other thing is imagine all the places that you can take it, all of the things you could put in it, on it, all kinds of adventures in your own story. So, with that said, Star-Ann?
Are you ready, Joy?
I am ready.
All right.
Show me how to do this.
Okay, so when I made this one, I made some notes to kind of think about some things we wanted to talk about. And I wasn't sure how much previous sewing experience you had or anybody watching would have had. So there are a few things that we need to do prior to jumping in to the construction.
Okay, that's
All right.
great to know because I don't have a lot of experience.
So one of the things is for this type of bag, a bit heavier fabric works well. This happens to be a pink kind of denim type fabric.
Yeah, so
And
it looks like
it's got
jeans.
some body to it, right. And jeans would be great. A denim like that would be great. A red or denim or black or just anything, but a bit heavier. It gives it more body. And then you're going to need fabric for the lining, and that can be what I would call quilter's cotton, just a nice cotton fabric. And what I have done with both of these pieces is they have been pre-washed. And what that does is it shrinks up the fabric if it's going to shrink, and so that when they are sewn together, and if you needed to launder your bag later, then it would be ready to go.
Well, I can get into some pretty messy things with my
Right.
huskies. So.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. So that's just kind of why I pre-shrink all my fabric, whether I'm quilting or doing this, and some other projects that we're going to look at later, I laundered that also. So I just throw it in and wash it and treat it just like I would any
I'll
other
take your
laundry.
bag
There's
here.
that. Okay. So when we're getting ready, the book comes with instructions, and it comes with a pattern that you'll need to enlarge.
I copied the page that had the pattern on it, and then I cut it into little pieces, and I enlarged each of the pieces, and then I taped it all back together. So it was kind of like a puzzle.
Right. Because they can't get a full-size pattern in a book like that.
No,
So-
it would be way too
Right,
big.
it's just for you to look at. So here's the pattern for the outside of the bag. And when you get ready to choose your fabric, there is something on your fabric that I want to make sure that you're aware of because it goes with the arrow on the pattern. This is called the selvage of your fabric. And it's the area that is finished on the edge. And we never use the selvage when we're sewing. That's just cut away and gone. It's woven differently and tighter, and it never wears the same as the rest of the fabric that isn't woven this way.
Huh.
So the selvage is just a waste. Usually you'll find out who printed the fabric and what when. So then you have the other side where there is no selvage. Now, the pattern has an arrow, and that says grain line. That's the straight of the grain. Our fabric has the lengthwise grain and the crosswise grain. The crosswise grain will have more stretch in it, and the lengthwise grain has very little. The lengthwise grain runs parallel to the selvage. So that's what the arrow is on our pattern.
Well,
It
that's
goes
cool.
with the grain line, it goes with the lengthwise grain of
I didn't know that.
the fabric.
Thanks, Darian.
And there's the same arrow on the flap. So that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna put this over here for
So
right now.
if we were using, like, say, an old pair of jeans, would we be able to know what way the grain went?
I would pull on that, and the one that has the least amount of stretch is the lengthwise, and there'll be a little for the crosswise.
Perfect.
Yeah, that would probably be a good way to figure that out. Now, I have already cut out our bag, and when we cut out our bag, there are some markings on here that we need to remember. One says wing or flippers, and that's the little, what I called the ears on that one. Okay, and so we need to mark where those go. And the other is at the bottom, where we're going to leave on our lining, we're going to leave it open. We don't have to mark this for the outside of the bag, just for the lining. We use the same pattern for the bag and the lining. It also tells us how wide the seam allowance will be, and this is 5/8 of an inch. That's pretty standard for garment sewing, not so for quilting.
Huh.
Okay, so on your pattern, you will see dark, solid lines on the outside. That is your cutting line. The dashed lines on the inside are your sewing line. And when you're cutting your fabric pieces, I always put my right sides together, line up the pattern, and then line up the edges, and then put the pattern on and cut it out. Then I marked with just little, I just took my Sharpie pen and just put a little dot within the seam allowance so it won't show of where the flippers need to be placed.
And that's on the inside of
It's
the
on the
fabric.
inside, and it won't show wherever, so that's where those go.
Wonderful.
Then, with the flap, we cut 1. And our pattern tells us, main purse body, cut 2 of main fabric, that's the heavy denim, cut 2 of lining. So this is going to be the lining, and I'll show you how we're going to cut that when we get to that. So the flap, again, straight grain, no openings that we need to leave on this. And it does have the position for the eyes and the muzzle, or the beak or the mouth or the platypus, whichever pattern you choose to make from that, which you'll need to transfer to the wrong side of this. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, so you want to make sure that your fabric has been pressed. It's very difficult to get something accurate, cut out accurately without pressing your fabric ahead of time, especially if you've pre-washed it, then it's going to need to be pressed. Now, here we go. Here is the arrow that runs parallel to the selvage. I want to put my right sides together. Here's the wrong side, here's the right side. So I'm going to fold the right sides together. I'm going to line up this edge even with the selvage because I tore this along that edge, and so it tore evenly on the grain line. So I could do that. If I had just cut it, it might not be even, and I would need to straighten that out. So there's the lining. Now, the selvage is right here. This arrow goes parallel to the selvage. So I'm going to lay it right here. And I'm going to skip about 3/8 of an inch because that selvage is that wide and I don't want that. I'm going to line it up here. Now this is on the fold, and I'm going to save that because that's a nice piece of fabric that I can use for something else later. I don't want to just stick this in the middle because I waste so much fabric.
Oh.
And you know, if I'm making a quilt, that's a nice little piece of fabric for a quilt. So I'll put this here, and I place my pins in the seam allowance far enough away from the edge that when I cut, I won't cut over them because that'll ruin the blade of my scissors very easily. Arrow straight, parallel to the selvage. Then, now, you notice I have two pairs of scissors.
I see that. Which one?
Under penalty of death, these are never used for anything but fabric. Square, and then I'm going to put a dot right through that pinhole. And the button will cover that dot up. That tells me that that's the center of the eyes. And you probably can't even see this on the camera, but there's a dot right there and a dot right there. Right. Now, the muzzle part I can place by eye. I don't have to mark that on. So I'm ready to start some sewing. Are you?
Yay. I am.
Okay, so what we're going to do is for the flap, we are going to line up the edges, right sides together of the outside of the bag and the lining. And then we're going to pin to where the seam allowance is going to go. And we're going to stitch all the way around. And I usually put pins every so often to really hold that. We are not going to stitch across the top. That stays open. That's how we'll turn it inside out. And that will be caught in the top of the bag seam. So we don't have to leave an opening. When we make this lining, we will have to leave a turn opening.
Moments later.
And start with a 5/8 inch, and that's what this little gadget is here.
Oh.
This is a seam guide. There are several ways you can do that. You can put a little stack of painter's tape right there at the 5/8 inch. You can get, you know, those extra credit cards and solicitations you get in the mail that are heavy plastic. Those work well to tape to this place at the seam allowance where you want them. This happens to be an attachment that I got from my machine, and it's set at 5/8 inch. So what I'm going to do is come in just a little ways. I'm using a medium-sized stitch, not too long, not too small, as Goldilocks would say. And I'm going to stitch forward just a little bit. Lined up here. And I took a couple of stitches, and now I'm going to back stitch. I don't do that when I first start because I can catch a lot of thread and end up with a nest of thread and twisted fabric at that end. So now I'm ready to go forward. And remember, when I'm running my machine, it's kind of like driving a car. I am in charge of how fast this machine goes or not by how I press the presser foot at the bottom now on the floor. I can press it really fast, and then I keep my fingers out of the way, or I can just go where I can watch what's happening. Now when I'm sewing, I'm not watching the needle.
Oh.
I'm looking at where I'm going. That's what keeps it lined up and straight. And I'm just going to kind of keep pushing that stuff in there where I want it to stay. And then I'm going to come down here to the curve, and I'm going to take a few stitches around, right up to the curve. And see, if I go a little slower here, then I can make that curve happen. And the edge of the fabric is right up against this edge. And sometimes I need to just stop and raise my presser foot and gently turn that. Take a couple of more stitches, turn it some more to get that nice rounded edge that I want in that flap. And then I'm going to come right straight across. Okay. So I'm going to stitch, keeping the edge of the fabric up against my seam guide. And I'm going to stitch right up to here. And remember, I'm not looking at the needle. I'm watching to where I'm going. That helps me keep this edge even on the seam guide. Now see how it's starting to come away from the seam guide? So I'm going to stop, and I'm going to raise the pressure foot a little bit. I'm going to pivot. And I'm going to take a couple of more stitches. Always turn the wheel on your machine toward you. Never turn it away from you. And I'm going to stitch a little more. And I'm going to turn and pivot a little more. See, my needle's going in right here where that is there. But here's where I need to look, because I need to make sure that this is turned like that. And now it's lined up. Get that pin out of the way. And I'm going to stitch, keeping this
And you know, I can let go of that and it'll pull it through myself. So my hand on here is not heavy. My hand is just gradually making sure those edges are up against my seam guide. The pan out of the way. The feed dogs on your machine are what pull the fabric through. And if you keep your fingers in here, they won't get in the way of the needle. If you put them up in here, ouch. I got to the edge, and now I'm going to backstitch, secure that, come forward again, and I'm done. Now my machine has and all machines do, a little place where I can cut that thread by pulling it up, over, and cut. And there it is. So there's a lot of bulk here, and this is heavier fabric that we talked about in the beginning. And we need that for the body of the bag, but we don't need a lot of it in where we're having our curves or corners. So there's a term that's called grading your seam allowance. And what we're going to do is I'm turning back the lining out of the way, and I'm only trimming the bag fabric. And what I'm going to do is this is a 5/8 inch seam, so I'm going to trim this piece down to about 1/4 inch. And I am not going to cut the bag part, I'm only cutting in the seam allowance. And I'm just going to get rid of that in the corner. I'm going to get rid of that. Now, you can see how much that got rid of the bulk that would be in that corner. I'm also going to do the same thing with the lining. It's going to be sticking out just a little bit beyond the bag body, fabric of the bag. There. So what that does, it has the inside, here's the bag, here's the lining, and that's called grading your seam allowance. Now, what I'm ready to do is turn this, because remember we left the top open. I'm going to turn this inside out. And I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to just press really into that corner. If I use my scissors to poke that, I could very well go through there. I don't want to do that. So I usually use my fingers. Sometimes a chopstick works well. You can do that. This is a bamboo turner, and it's got a point on the end of it, but it isn't as sharp as the metal on my scissors. So I can just take that into the corner and gently work that corner out. And do the other side, same way. Just work that corner out. And there's a lot in there right now, so first I'll push it out with my finger, and then I'll fine tune it with the turner. And just gently poke it. Don't poke real hard because you don't want to go through. There it is. Then what I like to do with my turner is just kind of go right along that seam allowance, and it kind of makes that fold right there. And I'll bring it over here and do the other side. Then the next step is going to be to press this. So with your iron, if you have a steam iron, I don't like to put water in my iron because I think that's hard on the irons. I usually have a spray bottle next to my iron, and I just gently mist it and then press it. So there's that.
Moments later.
What we just finished was the flap. And this flap is going to be caught inside the bag right here. That's why this is left open. And remember, we put our little dots where the eyes are going to go, and we used button eyes. And so we'll have to be attaching those later.
Okay.
Okay. So now, when we have some more seaming that we're going to do.
Uh-huh.
And so with the lining, we sew exactly the same way we did on the flap. The lining is going to be the right sides together, and this time we're going to pin it again, and we're going to stitch from one side over to our mark right here and stop and back tack it. So I'll put a pin there, and I'll put another pin here. And then I'm going to skip. I'm not going to stitch here. I'm going to come over to my next mark, and that's where I'm going to back tack and start again. And I'm going to leave this open so that I can turn this later. So right now we're ready to make the ears or the flaps that go on the side of the main body of the bag. And that pattern piece, again, has an arrow for the straight grain, and it has a 5/8 inch seam allowance and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So this is a little narrower because part of that's because of that curve. And this is the part that will be caught into the body of the bag. So what we've done, it says on the pattern, cut 4 of these, but we cut ours a little bit differently. We cut 2 of the bag body and 2 of fabric that we want to use for the lining. This fabric will match the muzzle as well as the inside of the ears. So we're going to pin that again. And we're going to stitch it, but once again, we're going to leave that straight edge open. That's how we'll turn it.
Okay, Joy, remember that our other seams were 5/8 of an inch. This one says 3/8 of an inch, so I need a narrower seam. So what I'm going to do is loosen this screw and slide this down to the marking that says 3/8 of an inch. Tighten that screw back down, and then I'm going to stitch, leaving the straight edge open. And just like I stitched the rest of the bag, I'm going to come forward, then I'm going to go backwards a little bit to secure that, and then I'm going to come forward again. Watch, I'm looking down here, I'm not watching my needle. And I'm just going to go around and around and around. Now this starts to be a little sharper curve, so I have to move it around. And again, I'm going to take that pin out because it's kind of going to be in the way real soon. And I'm going to rotate it again. And this machine has a position where I can have the needle always stop in the down position, and I'm going to implement that right now because I want it to stop. See, the needle stays down. Then I'm going to turn it around. And again, now I can move this pin. Get that pin out of the way. And stitch right up to the edge, back stitch. Nope, and now I have to raise the needle because I'm going to take it out. And I'm going to cut that. There we go, and there is my shape of my ear. Now again, this is a 3/8 inch seam, but that's still quite a bit of seam allowance in there. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to cut a little bit of the bag fabric out of the curve so that it goes around. And I'm just making sure that I'm only cutting out the bag fabric right now. And that'll give that not so much bulk in there, and it'll turn easier. Okay. Now because I left this end open, it's going to be easy to turn it. And we'll have the 2 ears. And I'm going to go in here, turn them right side out, poke that out with my fingers. And then I'm going to take my turning stick or my chopstick, whatever I might happen to use. See how that I can kind of work that out there gently, pushing it out towards the edges. And that, and I can flip it over. Now, these ears kind of have a distinctive shape. So when I'm putting them in the bag, I have to make sure I have them going the right way. And this is then where also, again, where I'm going to want to press that. And I'm going to do some finger pressing with it right now. There we go. There's one ear, and here comes the other one. Same way.
A few moments later.
So, now that we have the needle rethreaded, here's a little tip. Always make sure you hold those threads in your hand when you get ready to start. And that eliminates coming unthreaded. There we go. Okay. Raise it up. Now we have one ear basted on. And now we have the other ear. So I want to make sure I'm looking to get that same shape, a mirror image, and I have to put the right sides together. Okay, let's see. I don't think that's because this is straighter here. So this needs to go like this, and the raw edge is even. And then I have to find my marks. There's one up here. The seam even with the mark. In goes a pin. Right about there. And the other mark, yep, right about there. And I have the, I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, by eye, this ear looks a little higher than this one. What do you think? Maybe just a smidgen.
I think so.
I think this is a good time to move that one right in place. Yep, close to the mark. And I'll pin it again. Is that better?
I think I might move
it some more?
just a little bit more.
Okay.
That looks
There
pretty
we go.
straight to me.
Okay. We don't want a lopsided monster.
Unless the monster
Is
wants
this-
to be a lopsided.
Could be. All right, now I'm going to, again, baste this, make sure my threads are out here so I'm not air sewing. When I get ready to start, take that pin out, hold that down, and just start stitching across here. Pin's coming up, gotta get rid of that. Done. Raise the needle up. So the ears are now basted in place, and when we sew the bag together, they'll flip out. This will be the back of the bag, probably, and the front will be where you see the ears. That's the way we did that one, and this matches the muzzle. So, to make that happen, I need to keep this as I basted them, and I need to take my other bag, which this will be the front of the bag, but the exact same size, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to put the right sides together, raw edges even. I'm going to pin it into place. And you'll see how I'm catching the ears on the inside. I'm making sure that they are flat. I don't want them to get crumpled up there because then I'd have wrinkled ears. I'm going to line up this edge. Pin that in place. I'm going to come back here and I'm going to put a pin on each side of the seam of the ears, just to kind of hold that in place. It's pretty thick there, so I don't want to try to pin through that, but this will kind of hold it where it needs to go. I'm going to leave the top open. I'm going to flip it over. Line up the corners. Going to line up the edges, put a pin here. Then I'm going to make sure this corner's lined up. Corner's lined up. Pin. Another pin just outside of the ear right there. And since this is not the lining, then at this time, I'm going to stitch all the way around. So I'm going to start here, come all the way around, and back up to here. I'm going to put a couple of pins in here to hold the bottom of the bag where I want it. Stitch from here, over the ears, turn the corner, across the bottom, back up to the top, leaving the top open. And there's the right side of the bag. Now, remember I moved my seam guide for those ears 3/8 of an inch. Now I have to move it back to 5/8 inches. So I'm going to loosen that screw and take it back to 5/8 inches. And you know, I can tell where that is on this machine because there are marks in the throat plate there. I can tell where that is. But, and this says 5/8 of an inch right there, but you can't see, it's really hard to see. I also have a ruler that I put under there, and I mark it for 5/8 inch and butt it right up against that. And then I stitch it down, or tighten it down. Up the right edges against that. I'm going to come forward a little ways. See, I'm not starting right on that edge because I'll get a knot of thread in there. I'm going to come forward, a couple of stitches, and then I'm going to go backwards, and I'm going to come forward again. And I'm just going to stitch right up to this pen, pull this pen out, and now I have to make sure that this little point right there, I might want to trim that off. When I get up to where that seam is, it's going to get very thick, so I'm going to slow down. And I'm just going to take a back stitch right there, hold that where I want it. Because now I'm stitching through almost 4 layers of fabric here.
And 3 of those are denim.
That's right. And I'm going to take that ear out and out of the ear. There's the edge, and I'm just going to take a back stitch. There we go. And I'm going to stitch all the way down to this corner. Now remember when we stitched our flap, we had a curved corner. Now I have a 90-degree corner. I'm going to do something just a little bit different. I'm going to stitch almost down to where that 5/8 inch would be, and then I'm going to turn at a diagonal, and by hand I'm going to turn this, bringing the wheel toward me. 1, 2 diagonal stitches. That helps my corner turn a little easier when I'm putting it back together. And there's my 5/8 inch. And now I'm going to stitch across the bottom. Put that pan out. Okay. So Joy, this is our strap, and this is just a piece of the body of the bag. And what we need to do with this is fold the right sides together, raw edges even, and seam this. We're going to take our 5/8 inch seam allowance all along this straight edge. I'm just going to pin a few of them here and there. And you might feel more, if you haven't sewn a lot, you might feel more comfortable pinning more just to keep those raw edges even, because they can slide around. And you can see how that kind of rolled in a little bit, and I want to pin that out where I want it, where it's supposed to be. And we move this back to our 5/8 inch, so we're good to go. And I'm going to line this up, stitch forward a little bit, back stitched, and now I'm just going to stitch right along the 5/8 inch seam along that edge. And I'm going to stitch this the full length of
2 hours later.
Okay, so I've stitched the full length of the strap, and I've back stitched and cut my thread. Now, this is, to me, the hardest part of the whole thing, because we have to turn this right side out. And I found that this seam is pretty thick to do that, because I tried to do it without trimming the seam, and it works much better if you trim the seam. So I'm going to come back and just kind of right down the middle, by eye, just trim this seam. And it doesn't have to be marked. I just need to get rid of this bulk in here so that I can turn this. And it's easier really to take this 5/8 inch seam and trim it down than try to stitch a narrower seam in the first place, especially if you haven't stitched a lot. Then you're going to need a safety pin for the next step, and a bigger safety pin is better. So don't use one of those little teeny tiny goldish ones. Use a bigger one. That's scrap, we'll get rid of that. Now, this is the tricky part. Got my opening, and I'm going to thread my pin through just one part of the opening. Can you see in there, Joy, how that pin is coming out through just the top part? I'm going to close that, and now I'm going to take this backwards. This is going to go into this tube, and I'm going to push it in on itself. And as I'm doing that, I have to work this back over that pin. So you can see why getting rid of some of that seam allowance in there makes this easier. And I'm just going to keep working this. And once I get so far, it'll kind of go a little better. You can see. Now see it's disappearing? The pin, I'm holding on to the pin, is right here. There's the head of the pin. And I can feel it. And I just keep pushing it into this tube and kind of makes a gathers up there. And then I work those gathers back over the edge and both sides. Whoops. And sometimes that pops loose.
2,000 years later.
And we have the bag, body, we have the lining, and we have the flap. So before we go any further, we're going to take the flap and we're going to think about what the face is going to look like. So on this one, we used buttons and we made a muzzle. So I'm going to show you how that I did that one, and then I know you've looked at some other ideas on how to make the eyes and the mouth with some cool buttons. So let's talk just a little bit about the muzzle. The muzzle is this piece right here. And what I did with this to get the one that's on our bag is I put this up to the window. I put this up to a window so the light shone through the back. Then I put this over the top, and you can kind of see, just even from the light in our room, how that shows through. And then I took my marker and I just traced the little smiley face on there, because I decided I wasn't going to sew that. Now, this needs a little stability. So what's on the back of this is some fusible interfacing. And you can, I don't know if you can even see that real well on the camera, but I have a scrap that shows you what that's like. So that's a piece of this stuff that is bumpy on this side. That's glue. And the bumpy part goes against the wrong side of the fabric, and then you hold an iron on it for about 2 or 3 seconds. Then you cut it out in the shape that you want, and that fuses it so it doesn't ravel, and it holds it and gives it some body when you get ready to sew it. That's what I did with this one. So that piece is just like this, with this piece behind it. Draw the mouth, cut it out, stitch it down. And I did that on the flap before I put it together, so that only that stitching only shows on the wrong side of the bag, and it doesn't go through the lining. I'm going to quickly show you how I did the muzzle. Remember earlier I said that I held it up to the light and that it shone through, and I drew it on with a marker, and you can see how this is pinned to the fused fabric. I'm going to trim that out, and then I'm going to show you, I'm going to do it on this side because I don't want my sewing scissors getting caught up in the paper. I'm just going to go right around that. And then I'm going to use a glue stick, and I'm going to, looks like there's a point there. There's a point, we'll get rid of that point. There. I'm going to glue this. If this were the flap of my bag, I would glue this in place with just this fabric, with the fusing on the back. Decide where it goes, just like that. And then I'm going to zigzag around that. And when I zigzag around that, I'm going to get rid of this. I don't need my seam allowance more, so I'm just going to back it up out of the way. And I'm going to do some adjustments on my machine. I want, because this is such a very small piece, I'm going to do the zigzag. So that's that one. And I don't really want it that wide. It says it's a 3. I'm going to back it down a little bit to probably about a 2. And then I want it a little closer, so I'm going to make the stitches closer together. I'm going to put them about a 1. There we go. We'll see how that works. And then I'm going to bring this up. And if you, sometimes machines have a single hole throat plate. Make sure you change that out or you'll break a needle. This is the salvage on that we didn't use. And I'm going to, there's a mark right here in the middle, which is the middle of my foot. And that I'm going to try to keep lined up along the edge of this piece of fabric right there. And again, I'm going to kind of hold on to that. Let's see what it does. I'm going to turn this by hand. Okay, and I'm going to see where that lands. I'm going to scooch it over just a smidgen. There we go. And we're going to zigzag this on. And you can see it's just going, and I'm just taking, because it's such a curve, I'm just taking several stitches. I'm keeping it lined up with that mark right there. I'm keeping the edge of the muzzle lined up with that mark on my machine foot. And whenever I pivot, I make sure the needle is in the background fabric, not on the muzzle. Now, if I were doing this for real on my bag, I would use fabric probably to match the muzzle. And this time, this shows gray fabric, or thread, because that's what I have in the machine from what we were doing. Usually I just use a neutral. And so I want to bring this back over to the back.
Plus, it's easier for us to see on
It's
the camera,
easier for
too.
you to see, that's right. And make sure it's in the bag. And pivot. So you can see, Joy, how this would be easier to attach to the flap before it was in the, attached to the lining, before I made that envelope with the lining. And that's kind of a straight piece there. So I went a little faster. And make sure the needle's in the bag fabric. And that needs to be there. By having this muzzle fabric fused with that stabilizer on the back, it keeps it from puckering when you're doing this kind of work. There, done. Now the buttons, again, I put, I'll just borrow this one for right now, where the dot is, line up the middle of the button with the dot that I put on there, and I'm going to take a stitch and hold that in, and I'm just going to do that through the flap of the bag, body of the bag, not including the lining. So all that stitching will be inside this little envelope, not showing here. And it's probably really easier if you do that before you sew the lining to the bag fabric flap, and then it won't show. So that's something we have to do yet with this bag. And before we put the rest of it together, that's what we're going to need to do.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the options we went through when we were talking about what to make our monster look like. You see I have these green buttons that could be eyes if I use black thread on the center. It will make kind of slit eyes.
And you might want to use a heavier thread, like embroidery thread or something for that.
Mm-hmm. And I could use, instead if I didn't want to do the muzzle, I could use a button. I have a big red nose. It could have a big red nose like Rudolph. I like this one, kind of like a pig nose.
I do too.
And for the eyes that I'm going to do, I decided to go a little fancy, and I found these shiny buttons. So I like those a lot.
They kind of look like mother of pearl, but I'm not sure they are.
And then I found these little black buttons that kind of stick out. So I think I'm going to sew those into the middle. So it looks kind of like got eyes sticking out. So
That's very cool.
that's what we're going to do next. And in the meantime, Starianne, would you tell them about what the strap is what's going on with the strap?
Sure. And here's your needle and thread, because I understand you're good at sewing on buttons.
I am very good at sewing on buttons.
There you go. So the strap, we got turned. And what we did with the strap is I folded the seam to the middle so that the other side looks like that. And then with my fingers, I kind of made sure that the seam allowance was going all the same direction. And it's all going this way. And I press this down with my fingers. Now, the next thing I would do is take this to the ironing board and press this right down like this, making sure that seam allowance doesn't twist and stays right there. And stitch that all the way down. Then I'm ready to start putting this together.
2 hours later.
Okay, Joy. You got your buttons sewed on here, and this is really cute. I love this. So here's the look of just plain buttons and a muzzle. And then here is our, your creative one with the double buttons and the pig snout button for the nose. It really turned out cute. And notice that that is not on the lining. It's just on the front cover of the flap. And now we're going to be ready to start putting all of this together. Ready? We're ready to put it together.
I'm ready. Let's do this.
So here is the body of our bag. We're going to turn it right side out. We graded the corners again, like we talked about earlier. And there are the ears. So we'll push the corners out. There's the bottom. There we go. I don't know if those are ears or flippers or what they are, but they look like ears to me. And here's the lining, which we're going to need. And here's the flap. Now, when we're sewing this all together, we're going to sew it together up here at the top, and we have to include the strap in there, the flap, and the lining.
Wow.
So, we need the safety pin again, because when we put the flap on, we want it to come from the back over this way.
I see.
So what I'm going to do, so I'm going to say this is the front of the ears. Is that the way you want it?
That makes sense to me.
All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a safety pin on the back of the bag, so I remember where it is. Like that. And then I'm going to put this flap right here so that it'll come up and over like that. And the flap fits in between the seam allowances of the bag. There's where we sewed the seam together. The flap doesn't go edge to edge. It's kind of right here and right here because we have to have room for the straps.
That makes sense.
So that's where that's going to go. Now, the strap has to go inside the bag for right now. All this in here. So you see we stuck all that strap in there. And we took this and we're going to open the seam allowance so it isn't quite so bulky. And we're going to, let's check the directions and see what we are going to do. So we did this and we did that. So the main method put together, inserting the flipper wing and foot pieces in between and leaving it in the bottom, which we did. Okay. Nestle the lining into the main pouch. Insert the strap in between, lining each end up with a purse's side seam. Okay, that's what we're going to do.
Do we need to turn that inside out?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Mm-mm. Because we stitch across here, and then that's why this hole is in the bottom of the lining.
Ah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's making my head hurt.
Yeah, no kidding.
All the insides and outsides and right
Yes.
sides and wrong sides.
And what I want to see is the strap. I want to make sure the strap is where I want it to go. Because it has to be lined up with this raw edge.
Yeah, I wonder if this needs to be turned inside out and then goes inside this.
That goes, so what we're going to do is we're going to take, this is where I always said, okay, right sides together, lining, and lining in the bag, flap right sides together on the back. Okay. So this will go like this. And then we will pull the bag through this opening.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what we will end
Mind
up
blown.
doing. Okay, so what I want to do is make sure, but we have to have the straps
strap.
in between there.
So the strap needs to be on this side.
Yep, it needs to be,
On the outside.
it needs to be right here.
Needs to
Yep,
be
like there, yep. Again, that's thick right there. So I just like to offset that a little bit from that seam allowance because that's really thick. There, okay. And then I make sure you don't twist this and bring this. See how that was twisted? Then your strap would have been twisted on your bag, so we had to untwist that and bring this up so that, open that seam allowance and put this right here, like that. And pin that in place. Okay, then okay, so this has to go right sides together. And see how I'm catching the strap in between the lining and the bag? There's the strap. There's the lining. Here's the bag. So the strap is in between the two. I'm going to pin that in place. here for a minute.
I think that's right.
I just wanted to check and make sure because this is so confusing, but it really works neat when you get it done. And this is the back flap, so this goes here. Comes out over the top. And it really only just has to butt up against the strap. It doesn't overlap with the strap. That'd be way too thick. Scooch that over just a little bit so it's kind of centered on that back piece. There we go. Pin that in place. Then this. See, here's the body of the bag, the back. Here's the flap, right sides together. Here's the lining, right sides together with the bag on that. And all that's going to be caught in that seam. Now I can kind of just repin this. You don't need so many pins if I just repin it. Like this.
Yep.
That's one way we can do it.
All right, so do we need to flip it inside out now so it can go around the outside? Stick everything in there.
Yep. Now, Joy, all this is going to be stitched around this edge, and the strap and the flap and the bag are all inside of there. And then we'll come back and we'll pull it out through. We'll pull it out through the opening that we left in the lining to bring it right side out. And then that way, your top piece up here will be completely sewn together. There. Now I'm going to put this back to my 5/8 inch because that's what that top seam allowance needs to be. Okay, now it's going to get thick coming right across where that strap is in there. So I'm going to just kind of slow down a little bit. Stitch it and take it out and see what we have. And if we did this right, we will have we will be able to pull everything out through the bottom of the lining, flip it out. Comes the eyes, the snout, the flap, strap, the ears, and then we will push this down into the inside of the bag. Now, and the flap pops over, and we've got the eyes and the ears and the mouth in the right place. We have we'll press this strap. It's coming up, around, and over. There we go. Now, we're not quite done. We don't need this right now. We still have a hole in the bottom of our lining. Anything you put in there will get out through the hole, right? You can stitch that by hand with a ladder stitch, what they call a ladder stitch, or you can do what I did with it. I just took it back out because this is all hooked together now. I folded it kind of where the seam allowance would be and creased it with my fingers. I just took a very simple little stitch right along the edge of that bottom. And that's just going to catch that, and I don't have to hand stitch that. That's going to be inside the bag and it's never going to show. Now, if you were entering this for competition judging somewhere, you would not do that. But considering what we're going to do for fun and done, there it is. Now the lining's secure, and we'll put it back in the bag. There you go. And this is when it needs a good pressing.